Okay, so when most people think of Wolfenstein, they think of running into a room with a machine gun in each hand and holding down the triggers until everything stops moving. But the OG Castle Wolfenstein was actually a 2D stealth action game. In fact, it's widely considered to be one of the very first stealth games ever made, beating games like Metal Gear to the punch by over half a decade. Okay, so you play as an allied prisoner of war, and your only goal is to find the secret war plans and escape a 60-room castle. But here's the kicker. Shooting your gun is almost always a terrible idea, and the game is brutally stingy with resources and forces you to play smart. Like if you manage to sneak up on an enemy and point your gun at them before they see you, they'll actually surrender. It's a brilliant little risk-reward mechanic, but my god, the pacing in this game was just agonizing. It hasn't aged well in terms of pure fun factor obviously, but the sheer ambition of its stealth system and the digitized German voice lines makes it a fascinating piece of a game. So 3 years later, in 1984, we got the sequel, Beyond Castle Wolfenstein. Visually, it looks almost identical to the first game, but mechanically, they tweaked it to make the stealth a little more robust. So the objective this time is to navigate a secret bunker, find a bomb and drop it outside a room where Hitler is holding a meeting, which is directly based on the real-life Operation Valkyrie. And like the biggest addition to the gameplay loop here is the dagger. In the first game, if you wanted to kill a guard, you had to shoot them and make noise. Now you can sneak up behind them and use the dagger for a silent kill. And on top of this, they also added the ability to drag the bodies of dead guards out of sight. Like this is a mechanic in modern games like Hitman, and it was right here in the Apple II era. It's still plagued by the same painfully slow pacing and clunky movement as the first game, but it genuinely pushed the boundaries of what a stealth game could be. Alright, so fast forward to 1992, and id Software buys the rights to the IP, and they completely ditch stealth mechanics, shift the camera behind the protagonist William B.J. Blazkowicz, and in the process, basically invent the modern first-person shooter genre with this Wolfenstein 3D. So the premise is kinda simple. You're a spy locked in Castle Wolfenstein and you gotta shoot your way out while uncovering a plot involving undead mutants and a mechanized Adolf Hitler. And the gameplay loop here is actually kinda basic. You move really fast in these pseudo 3D environments and shoot everything that moves. It essentially devolves into a highly repetitive key-finding simulator. You run through a maze of blue walls, shoot 5 identical guards, grab a silver key, backtrack through the same blue walls, unlock a door, and repeat. Also, every single weapon you pick up uses the exact same bullets, which means you never really have to make any tactical decision about resource management, but honestly, it deserves all the respect in the world for defining a genre.
Mein Leben!
Okay, so just a few months after Wolfenstein 3D, we got a standalone prequel called Spear of Destiny, and from a mechanical standpoint, this is literally just more Wolfenstein 3D. It uses the exact same engine, the exact same weapons, and the exact same core gameplay loop. You're still running around flat mazes, shooting identical guards and looking for secrets. The objective this time is to recapture the Spear of Destiny, which Hitler has stolen because of his obsession with the occult. So what it does differently is it has 21 brand new, highly condensed levels that are a bit more straightforward than the confusing mess in the original. Another highlight here are the boss fights, cause the game has a whole new roster of bullet sponges that will absolutely test your patience. And when you beat the final boss, you get a unique outro animation of Blazkowicz grabbing the spear before the game abruptly ends. It's a solid but a completely unoriginal expansion of the base game. Okay, next up we have Return to Castle Wolfenstein, released in 2001. Built on the Quake 3 engine, this game is widely regarded by old-school PC gamers as a masterpiece. Okay, so the game tasks you with investigating Himmler's SS Paranormal Division, with a plot involving twisted biological experiments and the resurrection of an ancient undead warlord. And mechanically, the gunplay in this game is actually phenomenal. It strikes this perfect balance between the fast movement of late 90s arena shooters and the slightly more grounded pacing of early 2000s military games. And the weapon arsenal is also pretty decent. You start with standard World War II guns, but as you progress, you get your hands on the Venom, a minigun, and even a Tesla gun. But here's where it kinda drops the ball, the forced stealth missions. Okay, so the game occasionally makes you do these mandatory stealth sections, and the problem is that the enemy AI is incredibly erratic. so it ultimately devolves into a tedious cycle of quick saving every 5 steps. Anyways, visually, the game is still stunning for its time, with some incredible looking environments. Overall, it's a decent game if you're into older shooters. Okay, moving on. In 2008, we got Wolfenstein RPG, a mobile game. Now looking at it, you might think this is just a port of Wolfenstein 3D, but it's actually a dungeon crawler. So like every time you take a step forward or fire your weapon, that counts as 1 turn. So you gotta like calculate whether it's better to fire a shot, take a step back to lure a guard, or use an item to heal. It also drops the serious tone of Return to Castle Wolfenstein and leans into pure comedy. And to avoid censorship on mobile platforms, they removed all the swastikas and replaced them with generic Axis imagery, and even gave the portraits of Hitler a little soul patch instead of his iconic mustache. You can also rip sinks off the walls and throw them at guards, kick mutant chickens to turn them into health pickups, and there are even a few mini-games in here. Anyways, the combat can feel a bit sluggish if you aren't a fan of old-school grid crawlers, but the sheer charm and tactical depth of it make it a surprisingly enjoyable spin-off that most people completely ignored. Anyways, just a year later, Raven Software released a full reboot simply titled Wolfenstein, and for years people kinda ignored it and they largely swept it under the rug, but not gonna lie, I actually really liked it. So you're in a fictional German town of Eisenstadt with an open hub area where you get to interact with different resistance factions, and this hub area is a massive pain in the ass. Cause like you gotta constantly backtrack to accept new missions, and every time you go back you gotta like fight the exact same respawning Nazi patrols, which ruins the pacing. And the visual presentation also suffers heavily from that late 2000s syndrome where everything is coated in excessive bloom and washed out browns. However, when you're actually in a mission, the mechanics are actually pretty fantastic. The core gimmick of the game revolves around a supernatural artifact called the Thule Medallion, which gives you access to Veil powers. And combining these Veil powers with some pretty decent weapon mechanics creates a highly satisfying gameplay loop. Also, the guns feel punchy, and Raven even brought their dismemberment system over from Soldier of Fortune, meaning every fight results in a gory mess of severed limbs and exploding heads. Yes, it's bogged down by some repetitive stuff and some gimmicky boss fights, but mechanically, it's a pretty cool game that I believe deserves way more respect than it gets.
The American is here!
Okay, so when Bethesda handed the reins to Machine Games, nobody expected them to completely reinvent the genre. But in 2014, The New Order was released, and it's a masterclass in game design. It's set in an alternate 1960s where the Nazis won the war, and it has this emotionally resonant narrative with some of the most hyper-violent shooting ever. Okay, so mechanically, I feel like this game single-handedly kinda revived the modern boomer shooter. Cause like you don't have a 2-weapon limit, you don't have regen health, and you also have this classic numerical health and armor system. And the shooting itself is also very fun. The guns are loud, the hit reactions are fantastic, and you can also dual wield almost everything. Like you can run down a hallway with a shotgun in your left hand and an assault rifle in your right. And what really elevates the gameplay loop is the perk system. So the game like tracks how you play and rewards you dynamically. If you prefer to go in loud and blow things up, you unlock assault perks like faster reloads for dual wielding and increased mag sizes. It makes progression feel very organic and directly tied to your playstyle. The level design is also phenomenal, letting you transition between stealth and total chaos. And overall, The New Order is simply an amazing Wolfenstein game, one of my favorites actually. Okay, next up, just a year later, we got The Old Blood, a standalone prequel to The New Order, and it stripped away all the emotional storytelling and the scale of the last game, and instead tried to deliver a more focused experience similar to the 2001 Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Cause like the game is split into 2 halves, infiltrating Castle Wolfenstein and dealing with a supernatural zombie outbreak in the nearby town. And cause it uses the exact same engine as The New Order, the core gameplay mechanics like shooting and the perk system remain intact. Anyways, the first couple of hours lean very heavily into slow, methodical stealth. You're basically forced to navigate through the castle avoiding armored super soldiers, and if you get spotted, you die almost instantly, forcing you to rely on silent takedowns. But once you escape the prison block and get your guns back, the game opens up into some of the best combat arenas Machine Games has ever designed. And in the second half of the game, when Nazi zombies are introduced, the combat loop gets turned on its head. Cause like these zombies just sprint at you in hordes, which then forces you to constantly stay on the move, prioritizing targets cause regular Nazi soldiers are simultaneously trying to shoot you. Okay, so the Old Blood is shorter, leaner, and mechanically sharper than its predecessor, and overall a great game. Okay, so the expectations for Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, were sky high, and visually the game looks incredible with some amazing environments. But mechanically, oh man, the gameplay loop here is just frustrating and poorly balanced. It feels like the devs forgot what made the New Order fun. Let's start with its biggest issue, the lack of damage feedback. When you get shot in this game, there's almost no audio or visual indication that you're taking damage. Also, the stealth mechanics, which were fantastic in the previous two games, are kinda broken here. They even nerfed the dual wielding mechanic. Now, the game does introduce a hatchet, which replaces the knife from the previous games. Throwing the hatchet into an enemy is incredibly satisfying, and the melee execution animations are top tier. Later in the game, you also get to choose a specific contraption, like the ramshackles to tackle through walls, the constrictor harness to squeeze through tiny pipes, or the battle walkers to reach high platforms, which adds some neat traversal options. But the core shooting, the bad stealth, and the awful damage feedback make it a frustrating experience at times. Okay, next up is a VR game, Wolfenstein Cyberpilot, which came out in 2019. Set in 1980s Paris, you play as a hacker for the French resistance who remotely takes control of these massive Nazi war machines, like a fire-breathing Panzerhund, a stealth drone, and a giant bipedal Citadel mech. And on paper, it all sounds amazing. Piloting these machines from a VR perspective should be the ultimate power fantasy, right? And for the first 10 minutes, stomping through the streets of Paris and incinerating Nazis is undeniably cool. But like, the mechanics are incredibly shallow, the whole movement is clunky, the targeting is overly simplistic, and the level design is kinda restrictive and pretty linear. And the game tries to break up the combat by throwing you into this boring hub area where you gotta do these tedious hacking minigames to prepare the mechs for the next mission. But the biggest offense of Cyberpilot, however, is its length. The entire game can be completed in about an hour and a half to 2 hours at max. It feels less like a fully realized Wolfenstein game and much more like a shallow, overpriced technical demo designed to show off a VR headset. It's not infuriating, it's just completely forgettable.
No need for my hacking skills this time, I see.
And finally we have Wolfenstein Youngblood, a game that drove the franchise off a cliff. Released alongside Cyberpilot, this game shifts the focus to Blazkowicz's twin daughters, fighting through Paris in the 1980s. So, in a desperate attempt to chase industry trends, they tried to turn it into an open-ended co-op RPG shooter, and the result is an absolute disaster. The core shooting mechanics have been completely mutilated by a horrible RPG leveling system. Enemies now have floating health bars, and if you wander into an area where the enemies are 5 levels higher than you, your guns do absolutely nothing to them. It completely destroys the fast-paced freedom that made the shooting in the New Order so much fun, and the forced co-op mechanics are equally terrible. If you play solo, your sister is controlled by an AI which is profoundly and spectacularly stupid. She will stand in the open, ignore your commands, and actively watch you bleed out on the floor while you're begging for a revive. Also, the mission structure is an absolute chore. So the game uses a hub area where you're forced to backtrack over and over again, fighting the exact same respawning bullet sponge enemies just to complete tedious daily challenges and side quests so you can grind enough XP points to be allowed to play the main story missions. It's hollow, repetitive, and it took every single thing that made Wolfenstein great and threw it in the trash. So there you have it, the complete evolution of the Wolfenstein franchise. Let me know which game was your favorite, and I'll see you all in the next one.